Well, I wanted to transition to talk about Tennessee legislation. So this is from the Tennessee Conservative. Two new bills recently filed by Republican legislators would allow for exceptions to the state's current abortion ban. Under the existing law that took effect after last year's overturning of Roe v. Wade decision, all abortions are illegal no matter the circumstances in Tennessee. These new Republican backed bills would allow for some abortions that are deemed to be medically necessary or performed in cases of rape or incest. Senate Bill 0983, sponsored by State Senator Ken Yeager, would limit the offense of criminal abortion to only apply to elective abortions. The bill would also define elective abortion as any abortion that is not determined to be medically necessary to prevent the death of the pregnant woman or to prevent serious risk of substantial and irreversible impairment of a major bodily function of the pregnant woman. The legislation would only apply to impairments of a physical nature and would not provide legal protection for abortions performed for any reason related to mental health. State Representative Esther Helton Haynes is sponsoring companion bill HB 0778 in the House. State Senator Farrell Hale has also filed Senate Bill 0857, which would grant an exception for an abortion that is performed on a patient whose pregnancy is the result of rape or incest. The bill stipulates that the abortion must be performed before 8 weeks for women ages 13 and up, or 10 weeks for girls 12 and under. Additionally, physicians performing these abortions must verify that the rape incest was reported to the proper authorities and that the patient has gone through all necessary forensic medical exams before the procedure takes place. Filing a false report of rape or incest to be able to have an abortion would carry a mandatory minimum sentence of 3 years in jail. So that's some legislation currently being worked on in Nashville for Tennessee. So, Joey, since you've been quiet, we'll go for you for the initial reaction to this new legislation being proposed.
Well, it sounds like there's still a lot of exceptions in there, too many, in my opinion. I would consider myself more an abolitionist versus an incrementalist, but I am not opposed to taking wins where we can.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tennessee currently has one of the strictest abortion anti-abortion laws on the books. So what this really does for those who may not be aware is this really just weakens the legislation in Tennessee to make the laws in Tennessee more lenient towards abortion. And obviously these exceptions that they mention here are ones that most pro-abortion advocates cite in order to try to win the argument over for why they should have the right to abort. But these are very, very rare instances. In fact, it's less than 2%. I think it's 1.4% of all abortions are from rape or incest cases. So it's unfortunate that this is being considered because I'm kind of in the same camp as Joey. But Steve, let's go to you for your reaction.
I mean, the Human Life Protection Act has saved, they say, estimated 900 children a month from abortion.
In Tennessee alone.
In Tennessee alone.
Yeah.
And now, which, like you said, it is one of the, if not the strongest laws in the nation to protect unborn children. I'm actually grateful that Bill Lee and Jack Johnson and Randy McNally and Cameron Sexton were able to get this thing through, because we are, if it is the strongest, that makes us the strongest of the 50 that all have these. Now, do I understand that rare instances, like you said, of rape and incest? Yes. Is that the child's fault? No. That is the rapist's fault, of course, and I wouldn't want to wish that on any girl who has to carry that to term because they have this unplanned or this infringement on their rights to their privacy, their horrific attack, just a violation of them. But it's not the child's fault, and there are plenty of opportunities for adoption. And I know the foster care is not a great thing. I wouldn't want that either, but I know that there are a lot of loving homes, especially in the Christian community, that would love to take on those children if the need be, versus disposing of that human life, because it's a tough ideological thing to say, oh no, you just can't do that, you have to carry to term. But it is the right thing to do. It has to be done. The victim should be cared for, the baby should be cared for, and of course the person who perpetrated the violent act should be punished. All of these watered down jail reform laws and whatnot, they should be stricter when it comes to something like this. There are, Senator Farrell Hale and Representative Iris Rudder, they're the ones that filed the bill to weaken Tennessee law. I don't know what their lobbyists told them, made them think that this was the right thing to do. Maybe they actually agree with that philosophically, that the woman should have the option in those circumstances. But, I'm just actually very proud and thankful that Tennessee is leading the charge in this. And if there was a world without abortion, that would be a better place.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, this new proposition is essentially weakening what is current law.
Correct. Current law.
Okay.
And
I guess I must have missed that point then. That makes
Yeah.
my take even stronger on it. It's not a win. It's a total setback.
Right. And I figured that's what you meant when you said you were an abolitionist. So yeah, no, unfortunately right now, Tennessee, and someone can fact check me in the comments if you want, or in the live chat, but I don't know the exact legal all the exact legal parameters, but I believe that there's basically no exception for abortion in Tennessee currently. I believe that I think there might be some leniency as far as punishment goes for someone who is in like a rape or incest kind of situation. But there is still basically it's still illegal to get an abortion despite that. And that's where a lot of the campaign against this has come from is, unfortunately, like I said earlier, kind of on the flip side of things, they're not necessarily the shout abortion crowd, but there's still a lot of people that do believe that they should still have the ability to, in those unfortunate circumstances, still do these abortions. And so that's when we are really faced with
there are
the
no
moral
circumstances
dilemma.
in Tennessee where you can perform an abortion.
Right.
After Roe versus Wade was overturned, the trigger law put that into place. So this is all within the last few months.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. But, there's still those people that believe that exception should be made. And that raises the important question of, even in those horrible circumstances, is it morally okay to perform an abortion, if this is a child conceived out of rape or incest? And
I think
that's a big one.
I think no, but
bigger...
nobody would be happier to see the strongest laws in the country weakened than the abortion industry. So, just by being against them, I would have to say no.
Yeah.
It's a bigger conversation, I think, than just whether Tennessee says yes or no to abortions. And what I mean is that it's part of the conversation that we need to have when we think of the moral dilemma of this topic and what parameters can be put into legislation surrounding these topics, is that the operative word is performing an abortion. Experiencing an abortion and having a mother seek out abortion may just be as simple as crossing state lines at this point. So that's also an important distinction. And beyond that, when it comes to the moral dilemma of rape or incest, I think there's a cultural brokenness that goes beyond deciding whether or not to kill a baby once that happens. Can't we look deeper into why those things are happening and what circumstances are people putting themselves in that make that more accessible? A lot of rape culture is in young adults that are not married, young adults that are engaged in university settings or party settings. And more often than not, I don't know the specific statistics, but surrounding rape, violence, and even murder is drunkenness for a large percentile of those occurrences. So I think that there's more of a conversation here than just what the state is deciding on who's allowed to perform the abortion, because that only affects the actual medical staff.
Mm-hmm.
But for the individuals that are seeking out abortion, are they actually doing so because of rape and incest? If not, where else will they go in order to achieve their desired outcome? And if it is rape or incest, how can we as a culture affect mitigation of those opportunities for predators to act upon that sinfulness and that criminal action to create this situation wherein medical professionals and state officials and legislators are incentivized to become complicit in the murder of children? It's a problem. It's disturbing. And it's a much bigger conversation than just penning into law at the state level or the national, federal level. We have a broken culture of broken people that are being coerced into believing that this is an acceptable outlet and that it's an acceptable response to the conflict of difficulty. Being raped and becoming pregnant and carrying that child to term, I can't imagine the horror that would entail. And by no means would I ever allow myself or others to be insensitive to that horror. And yet, that does not give you the permission to neglect the autonomy of the child that you are carrying.
Yep.
That's a difficult conversation, and it comes with the weight of responsibility that those individuals in those circumstances may not have agreed to or asked for. And yet they are no less morally responsible to the individual in question that is entirely dependent on that carrying mother for life.
Yeah, it's a test. It's a test. Can I read something to you guys?
Go ahead.
So I came from Washington State, as I told you, prior to deciding Tennessee was going to be the home for my family, my kids. This was back in 2016. The University of Washington and associated individuals from Planned Parenthood and the university have settled a federal lawsuit with the Center for Medical Progress's founder and president, David Daleiden, over the release under the Washington Public Records Act of the university's documents concerning taxpayer-funded experiments on aborted fetuses. Under the terms of the settlement, the taxpayer-funded public university will produce extensive records concerning its harvesting, use, and distribution of aborted fetuses and their organs and tissues from 2010 to present, and pay $30,000 in attorney's fees to the council. Individuals associated with the university and Planned Parenthood will dismiss their lawsuit, preventing the release of the documents. Now, when Roe versus Wade was overturned and Tennessee became the strongest state in the country to basically bar it in all circumstances, as we said, the state of Washington went the other direction. They became a sanctuary state for abortions, meaning that if somebody from Tennessee said, "Hello, civil services of Washington state, I want to have an abortion, my state won't let me," they will fly you, house you, feed you, abort you, and provide your recovery and send you home, all on the taxpayer dime. I think that will have way more volume than rape and incest, in my personal opinion. I think the numbers speak for themselves at how little that is and how prevalent states like Oregon, California, and Washington are going to become as they become mills for out-of-state, stricter red state difficulties of getting that done. And I think that's terrible. I think to make the taxpayers of Washington, all of them, the Christians, the Catholics, the atheists, the satanic worshipers, the granola folks, whatever, all pay into this pot to do something like that, is a terrible thing. And that's why I personally believe having the state involved in this is unfortunate, because I wish we were all just, believing in a higher power and would never harm a fly if we could help it and not do that. But that is not the case. There is such thing as rape, and there are mistakes, and there is alcoholic experiments, especially on a college campus, Vanderbilt, UT. It's going to happen. It does. Having that as the option for birth control, basically, it's better the Tennessee way than the Washington way, in my humble opinion. And I'm not even a woman. It's not my right to choose or whatever. That's the way it's been framed. But that is the way I feel about it, is that I wish it didn't exist, but I'm glad it's stricter here than as promiscuous as it is over there.
Yeah, there's a lot that I want to comment on, but first I want to turn it to Joey to respond to that, because Joey's still currently in Washington. So Joey, those are your tax dollars hard at work.
Yep. Among many other things that my tax dollars are going to that I really wish they weren't. Yeah. I don't know that I have too much to comment on, other than sometimes it can seem hopeless, and but I don't know. I don't know what to comment.
And the $80 billion that the COVID relief funds went towards Planned Parenthood, that's everybody's federal tax dollars as well.
Yep,
so
right.
there's no hiding from
We're
this.
all
I'm not
paying
trying to
for it.
say that it's not a property tax issue.
Right.
It's a government funding of a industry issue, just like they bailed out the banks, or they bailed out the tech companies or the schools. Whoever they bail out, they're picking these favorites. They like to pick on Planned Parenthood for our tax dollars, whether we like it or not. And it's actually a federal offense. They're not supposed to do that. There's an act in Congress that says federal funds cannot go towards abortion, but they did it anyway. So.
Yeah. I wanted to comment on something that you said, and I'm going to kind of pick it, maybe take it a little bit further, Steve. The idea of, you kind of made the case for why the state should essentially be involved, whether we like it or not. Because ideally, in a perfect world, we just wish that everyone would have the same moral framework that we are espousing in this podcast, and would avoid getting an abortion at all costs. But obviously that's not the case. And I think Michael, to your point earlier, I think what you're getting at is there's obviously some root culture rot that is causing a lot of these issues. And so it really boils down to changing the culture, and how do we go about that? And Andrew Breitbart is credited for having said that politics is downstream from culture. And I think that's true in a lot of instances, but I also think that legislation can affect culture, because I think that you can make a very sound argument for the fact that our violent crimes have been going up in basically all throughout America, and most of it's in these major cities. But when you look at what's happened in these major cities, legislation has gotten looser on things like penalties for petty theft, all the way up to arson and looting and physical assault, sometimes even cases of murder. I mean, they tried to pass some insane laws up in Illinois recently. I can't remember the name of the act, but it basically was going to let people off the hook for like blatant first-degree murder, if I remember right. And I could be wrong on that, but it was
no bail.
Yeah, no bail. And, just insane things. So you can argue that, we're seeing rise in this degeneracy in our culture, but with that rise in degeneracy, we are seeing, a rise in leniency towards true justice and punishing criminals for crimes that they commit. Now, ultimately, I think what's upstream from both culture and politics is faith and theology, of course. And that's a whole other discussion as well. But I guess my only point is that we definitely want to see genuine change that is lasting in our generation. We hope that our culture can turn to God and repent from its wicked ways. And but at the same time, we can, in the meantime, use legislation to help at least alleviate some of those issues. And I know by no means, Michael, that you're saying we can't do any of those things. It was more just a point I wanted to flush out. But if you had anything to say to that, I'd love for you to have the opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is a subsequent cause and effect system of whether the cause for our current state is legislation or culture, and which is the effect of the other. I would argue that our culture is being more heavily influenced by media platforms than by legislation, and voters are acting upon the influence of those media platforms. It's going back to the Taylor Swift situation. Taylor Swift is not unique in her stance, and like what Steve was talking about earlier of the potential she has to gain from having that stance and that position publicly. People who are in the social platform and have a platform, be it through actual social media like Meta or Twitter, or if it's through other paid programming resources, they are incentivized to hold certain positions culturally. And Taylor Swift's position, she has everything to gain from being pro choice, quote unquote, pro choice or pro abortion. She has everything to gain because those who agree with her will rally behind her, and all of the media platforms will promote her as a result of that decision to make that stance. If she were to be pro life, then she has everything to lose because those media platforms will not support her with the same fervency. Her constituents will not engage with her. And what's disturbing is that the pro life Christian girls will continue listening to Taylor Swift no matter what she says. But I would say, more leftist progressives would boycott against her if she took a more moderate or conservative stance on any issue. Mm-hmm. So she has really every incentive to hold a specific position because of the structures that are put in place by the perception that's being propagated by our media platforms within our culture. And what I'm seeing, why I think that it's the big cities that are falling prey to the effects of this cultural leniency and therefore legislative leniency. I think that's a direct impact of the influence that media has on the people. And certainly I want to promote free speech. I'm not saying anything against that, but there is a whole nother conversation that we may not go into about algorithms for what is being promoted and what is being propagated and encouraged in our culture, videos and media resources that are becoming more accessible if they promote specific ideologies.
Yep.
It's all included in this conversation, and it's a disturbing reality that we live in, such that I think it's easier for a rural community that may be detached from those media platforms to make sound decisions that can affect legislation and the implementation of that legislation, whereas larger city hubs that are more highly and commonly engaged in those media outlets are going to be more easily swayed by the perspectives that are being forced upon them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you said a lot of great things there. And honestly, a lot of what you're getting at is it really boils down to, we have to build. We have to not just complain about things. We have to actively build new things, because, the reality is a lot of those cultural pillars that you were kind of describing there, a lot of them are running on fumes, and there is an opportunity right now for new things to displace them. And that's where, Christian creatives and just all freedom-minded creatives, not necessarily even just the Christian ones, but they just need to really put forth their best effort and create new things instead of just complaining about how things are. And that's part of the hope for this podcast. There's we need to do a lot of recognizing the problems before we can build. but we also want to be building while we are, acknowledging the issues. We want to be creating the solutions as well. And
there's some real life examples right here in Nashville that play out everything Michael just said, and it's actually quite fascinating. I've been lucky to sort of have an angle on them and on the show with some guests. If I could just take a second to explain that. So Disney is obviously the largest entertainment company probably on the planet, most recognizable. And we know Disney has been doing a lot of things with the LGBT community and just anti-Christian stuff, anti-American stuff, CRT stuff. Mm-hmm. Okay, we know that. Taylor Swift plays into that. And like Michael said, exactly right. She had everything to gain and everything to lose by taking a different stance than she took. So it was almost obvious. Well, Jason Aldean's wife, Brittany Aldean, had come out and said on Twitter some funny little thing. Thank God my parents didn't let me transition when I was going through my awkward tomboy stage. And he piped in and said, love you, baby, mean it, or whatever. Green Room PR fired him. Said, we have to go separate ways. We don't agree with you. He's the biggest moneymaker in probably the history of country music for them and ever will be. They were willing to shut down their website because of the blowback because of that. At the exact same time, you had John Rich, who very well liked, popular country singer, has a bar down on Broadway called Redneck Riviera, released a single, an anti-woke single, and now I think the second one, did it through Truth Social, which is sort of the anti-Twitter, the anti-Facebook, mainstream media censoring platform, and it was number one. Kid Rock also has a place down there and is fighting the good fight to try to preserve a historical building around here, beechwood.org it's called. He says he's uncancelable because it's true. He's got all the money he's ever going to need, and he can do what he wants, and he can release his own singles. He has that kind of thing. So there are these folks right here in Nashville fighting that good fight against the culture that says you have to be and Based Records, the guy who sold Post Millennial to Human Events, created Based Records here in Nashville, which is doing music where they can say, I'm a man, I'm a woman, and I love God. Like no one else can. And I'm dealing with this right now because I have another podcast in Hollywood with some guys, and they say, well, we have to start our own company. We can't be pegged as Christian or conservative, or we can't get guests. Wow. Okay, fine. That makes sense, I guess, in this new world. So what I'm trying to say is that there is the ability to fight that good fight, the David and Goliath that Michael was talking about, from the right, if you already have your status. If you're a new artist, you haven't had a number one record for Luke Combs yet or a song yet, and you're not raking in royalties left over right where you could have that FU money, as we used to call it, you can't do that. You cannot come out and say in your interview with Time Magazine or Newsweek, and I believe this, without risking the entire franchise. That's why Drew Brees had to backtrack. Remember his last year at New Orleans Saints, he had to backtrack and say, no, I don't really mean Christian values. I just meant, upstanding principles, because he had millions at stake. I'd like to be able to say here, sit here and say they all should make the right decision and do what's best for the glory of God and not for their pocketbooks. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works, because once you're out, you're out.